Dave Gemby here again to prove to you with some more evidence the perpetual turbine does work. Now, I talked about how you've got 48 volts there. So you've got a 12 volt motor making 48 volts, right? But a lot of people said, well, voltage, that doesn't matter. It's not about voltage. Well, actually, the pylons that supply electric to your home, they work on very high voltage to travel long distance. So voltage is actually a very important measurement of electric. But you've also got another measurement, watts. So on this generator, this wind turbine, it says 200 watts. I don't know if you can just see that. 200 watts, rated power, 200 watts. Now, 12 volt motor doesn't use anywhere near 200 watts, not even close. I'm going to prove it to you. So I've actually changed the setup slightly. What we're using here is a DC power supply to supply the speed controller and electric for the 12 volt motor, right? And then that spins the turbine, and then the charge, the wind turbine controller is then just sending the electric into the battery. Right, well, the battery is not involved in spinning the motor, it's just the DC power supply. So let's turn on the DC power supply. Turn it on. It's running at 66%, spinning the turbine, making electric. It's then being dumped into the battery. There. But if you actually notice, 12 volts, we're using 10, 11 volts. Turn that up a bit. That's about 12, it's switching to 12. We're only using between 5 and 6 watts. And what, half an amp? Yeah, you see that, the readings? 12 volts, 5, 6, 7 watts, not many watts, half an amp. 66%, so it's not even, the motor's not even running at full power. It's spinning the wind turbine at a good rate, a decent rate. You see it spinning, and it makes what? 200 watts. 200 watts, yeah? And 48 volts from 12 volts. Now, I'll turn it off now. Let's turn it off. It's making a bit of noise. Now, some people have talked about step-up transformers. They'll say, well, that's just a step-up transformer. A step-up transformer doesn't work anything like that. We can talk about them in a bit. I'll probably talk about them in more detail in another episode, because the energy industry isn't using step-up transformers anywhere near as much as they should. I'm going to explain that probably in another episode. But yeah, this technology has been suppressed, I believe. I believe it's been suppressed by the oil men. We're going to talk about them now. But this motor creates mechanical movements, create electric. Transformer works in a totally different way. I'll show you a diagram of a transformer first. So yes, step-up transformers. This is a diagram of one. So, step-up transformer, you've got an iron core, right? And then a small coil of windings next to a bigger coil of windings. And this, the magnetic fields that are generated here, what it does, it takes current in here and then makes more voltage in the current out there. And that's how a step-up transformer works. That's what they do with electric in power stations. So they have electric come out of the power station, and they'll increase the voltage of it in a step-up transformer, a substation with a step-up transformer in it, to then put that high voltage electric into the pylons, to then give it the energy to travel all the way to your house from the power station. That's how that works. But if you notice, I'm not doing that. I'm not just using a step-up transformer to create higher voltage. What I'm doing is I'm using mechanical movement to create more energy via electromagnetic induction. Now, I think it's really, a lot of people are having a hard time believing, what, Dave Gemby's actually smart. Yeah, I am. I'm a really clever man. You'd be surprised. I'm a smart guy. Anyway, I'm going to talk about the oil industry and why we don't actually have this technology now, why it's being suppressed. Okay guys, what I'm going to talk about first, we're going to talk about serfs. You are a serf, and you live in serfdom. What does that mean? It means that the state kind of owns your ass, and you're just viewed by the ruling class, the people who run the world. You're viewed as little more than cattle, like a cow or a sheep. That's all you are, honestly. You think, no, I'm a person, I've got, human rights and all stuff like, oh, come on, get real. The ruling class don't view you like that. And the problem is, at the minute on this planet, is we've got too many people on the planet. We've got too many serfs on the planet. There's too many people on the planet. And that causes a problem for the planet's health. The planet, because there's so many people on the planet consuming natural resources, and the most important natural resource is crude oil, probably followed by natural gas. Those two are particularly important, and they're controlled by the oil men. So who's the biggest oil man of them all? David Rockefeller Jr. and the Rockefeller family. He's the head of that family, and they've controlled crude oil, I believe, well, since the 1800s with Standard Oil, which was then broke up into smaller companies that they controlled. And because crude oil is so important, they control politicians, they control the banking system, they control everything. They control the courts, the law courts, they control everything. They control the laws that are made. They're very, very powerful. The oil men are very powerful. Like I say, they own your football clubs. Told you that before. But like the oil sheiks in the Middle East, I believe, are controlled by the Rockefeller family and David Rockefeller Jr. Now, they'll publicly say they're not involved in crude oil, but of course that's what they want you to think. They want you to think they're not involved in crude oil. And something like the Perpetual Turbine, they would want to suppress. Now, the reason they'd want to suppress it is so that they can control the population of the world. So if you're an oil man, you pump oil out of the ground, but you also pump natural gas. Now, natural gas is very important because actually natural gas is a chief ingredient in the production of synthetic fertilizer, the stuff that grows our food, right? So the oil men want to control everything, so they then, when needed to, they can control the population by making the price of food go through the roof. The way they do that is they just supply less natural gas and crude oil to the world economy. Crude oil, you need crude oil to run tractors. Diesel is made from oil, obviously. So like tractors, things like that. If you run a farm, you consume a lot of oil and natural gas to run that farm. If you've got cattle, that has to be fed on grain. The grain was grown using synthetic fertilizer. Now, like I say, we've got a problem of too many serfs, too many people on the planet at the minute. And you might have heard about the Great Reset. You will own nothing and be happy. Base, that means what the oil men are going to be doing is they're going to be doing a cull on serfs. And the way they do it is through food price increases, inflation of food prices, where a lot of people who are maybe not very well off will not be able to afford food. It's done through oil shortages and possibly gas shortages as well, natural gas shortages. And the reason is to just reduce how many people are on the planet. So we reduce our consumption of natural resources, and it eases the strain on the planet. Because if you just have loads and loads and loads more people on the planet, the population keeps going up. That does more and more damage to the planet, consumes more of the resources of the planet, to the point where the whole planet collapses. The ecosystems of the planet collapse, and then all of humanity is totally stuffed. We're all in the shit, basically, and the human race potentially could go extinct. The people, I say, the top guy, David Rockefeller Jr., you might look at him as the enemy, but really, he's a guy that's trying to save the planet and save the human race. If we overpopulate this planet, we've got a serious problem on our hands. It's probably a good idea, if you're planning a family, probably a good idea is to have 1 or 2 kids, maybe just 1, to try to keep the population of the planet down. Because it's a serious issue. And it isn't talked about much, because they are planning this cull on you with hyperinflation of price of everything going up. Oil, you probably won't believe me, but oil runs everything. It runs the world economy. It's an ingredient in loads of different products. If you want to harvest any natural resource, you've got to use crude oil. You know, say you run a copper mine, or you run so you're a guy who runs chopping down trees and stuff. You've got to run chainsaws that run on oil. You've got to transport those trees on lorries that run on oil. You've got a copper mine, all the machine, all the mining equipment runs on oil. Yeah? So the reason they don't want something like the Perpetual Turbine is because they can't then control the world population with oil shortages, where they just pump less oil out of the ground to conserve it. So they are actually eco-warriors. And I actually agree with what they're doing. I'm like Greta Thunberg. You know, but the thing that Greta Thunberg probably doesn't understand is the only way really to save the planet is reduce the amount of people on the planet. And the way it's going to be done by the ruling class is with starvation of millions of people in the future. They might even have a war as well to explain away why the economy's been restricted, the amount of oil. You know, probably a war between Russia and America or something, to explain away, maybe a Cold War, I don't know, to explain away. Or the Russians might take control of Saudi Arabia to explain away why we haven't got as much oil available to the economy anymore. But they're doing the right thing, because if they don't do that, the planet's stuffed long term. You can't just keep adding more and more serfs, more people onto the planet. You can't do that. And it's just how it is. So David Rockefeller Jr. is probably the man who's planned it all. He's probably the head oil man who's working with all the other oil men, the oil sheiks in Saudi Arabia and oil oligarchs in Russia. They're probably all working together. He's probably the head one, I would have thought so. And they're basically trying to save the planet by reducing how many people are on the planet. You know, the Great Reset, you will own nothing and be happy. It simply means we're going to have to starve people to death, where just all your resources are restricted, and access, food prices go through the roof, inflation, and that's going to reduce the population on the planet and ultimately save the planet. That's where we are as the human race at the minute. And if they just have perpetual energy, free energy, if they just release that to the people, how do they then control the world economy, food prices? How do they control? How do they control the world's population? They can't. So that's why the simple technology of using an electric motor, a small electric motor, to spin a larger turbine to create more energy out the back, small energy input into the motor, bigger energy output out the back, that's why it's been suppressed, because they would lose control of the global economy then, right? And they'd lose the ability to reduce the world's population when needed. Although I feel in one criticism of the oil men who run the world, I feel that they should have educated the serfs, educated the people from the beginning, that you need to restrict how many children you have. See, in China they have a one-child policy, and it has been effective at reducing the population there, or at least controlling the growth of the population. The whole world should have been told, you need to restrict how many children you have, maybe 1 or 2, no more. And that might have helped control this population problem that we've got on the planet at the moment. It's a serious, serious issue. So that's the situation. I'm just telling you the truth. All right then, see you later.